As my mother fought for her final breaths, my fiancé texted in a meeting from a five-star hotel bed, with his ex sleeping beside him. The call came at precisely 2:17 p.m. I was in the middle of a presentation when my phone vibrated against my desk. Normally I would have ignored it, but something made me glance down. The hospital's number flashed across my screen and my heart dropped. Without excusing myself, I grabbed my phone and rushed out of the conference room, ignoring the confused stares from my colleagues. "Miss Parker, you need to come immediately. Your mother's condition has deteriorated significantly." The doctor's voice was calm but urgent. "We don't have much time." My hands trembled as I gathered my things. Mom had been battling heart disease for months, but she'd been stable. This sudden decline wasn't part of the plan. I tried calling Daniel, my fiancé of 5 years, but he didn't answer. I sent a text instead. "Emergency. Mom critical. Need you to drive me to hospital now." 3 minutes later his reply came through. "In important meeting. Can't get away. Take a cab." The coldness of his response stunned me. Daniel knew how much my mother meant to me. She was my only family. After everything she'd sacrificed for me, after all the time she'd welcomed Daniel into our home and treated him like a son, this was his response? I called again. This time he answered with obvious irritation. "Emma, I told you I'm busy." "Daniel, please. Mom might not make it. I can't drive in this state." My voice cracked. "I need you. Look, I'm in the middle of something crucial. Take an Uber or call a friend." I heard soft laughter in the background, distinctly female. "Where are you?" I asked, my suspicion growing. "At the office. Where else would I be?" His tone shifted, defensive now. I ended the call and opened our location-sharing app. The blue dot showing Daniel's position wasn't at his office downtown. He was at the Westerly, the most expensive restaurant in the city. Confusion gave way to anger as I rushed to the parking garage. My car refused to start, the battery dead after sitting unused for days. Daniel had insisted we primarily use his car, claiming mine was unreliable. Now I understood the convenience of that arrangement. I pulled out my wallet to check for cash for a taxi, but remembered that Daniel had convinced me to use our joint account and cards exclusively, to better track our finances for the wedding. I called an Uber, selecting the joint payment method. "Payment declined" flashed across my screen. I tried again. Same result. In desperation, I ran back to the office and borrowed $60 from Jenny, my assistant. Her concerned eyes followed me as I rushed out. "Do you want me to drive you?" she called after me. "No, I'll be fine. Thank you," I replied, already halfway down the hall. The taxi crawled through midday traffic. Each red light felt like a personal attack. Rain began to pour, matching my growing sense of dread. I checked my bank app. Access denied. Daniel must have changed the passwords. Why would he do that today of all days? 45 minutes later, I finally reached the hospital, soaked from the brief run from the taxi to the entrance. The waiting room clock read 3:35 p.m. I gave the receptionist my mother's information and her face fell slightly. "Dr. Myers would like to speak with you before you go in," she said gently. Dr. Myers met me in a small consultation room. His expression told me everything before he spoke. "Miss Parker, I'm very sorry. Your mother suffered a major cardiac event. We did everything we could, but she passed away about 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes. If I had gotten here 20 minutes earlier, I could have held her hand. I could have said goodbye. There was a small window where intervention might have made a difference, Dr. Myers explained softly. The first hour after her initial symptoms was critical. Unfortunately, by the time she arrived here, I barely heard the rest. My mother had called me at lunch, mentioning she felt unwell. I had promised to check on her after work. If I had gone immediately, if Daniel had driven me when I first called. A nurse led me to see my mother. She looked peaceful, as if merely sleeping. Her hand was still warm when I took it. On her bedside table sat her old leather purse. Inside was a small velvet pouch, the one that held her wedding ring, which she'd never stopped wearing even 15 years after my father left us. "Your Daniel treating you right?" Those had been her words just 3 days ago. "Something about him reminds me of your father. The charm that doesn't quite reach his eyes." I had dismissed her concerns as outdated thinking. Now her question echoed like a prophecy. My phone buzzed with notifications. Still in shock, I checked it automatically. A mutual friend had tagged Daniel in a photo posted just 30 minutes ago. There he was, smiling broadly at the Westerly, champagne glass raised in a toast. Across from him sat Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend and just a colleague now, according to his repeated assurances. Her hand rested intimately on his, a gleaming bracelet catching the light, identical to one I had admired months ago that Daniel claimed was overpriced nonsense. As I stared at the photo, another notification appeared. A credit card alert. $342 charged at the Westerly. Our joint account apparently worked fine for expensive lunches with his ex. A nurse passed by, giving me a concerned look. "Are you all right, hon? You look like you might need to sit down." "I'm fine," I replied automatically, though nothing was fine. "No offense, but did you just come from swimming? You're soaked through." She offered me a set of paper scrubs and a sympathetic smile. "The family room has a blow dryer if you need it." I caught my reflection in the window. Mascara streaked down my cheeks, hair plastered to my head, expensive blouse clinging uncomfortably to my skin. I looked homeless while Daniel dined in luxury with Vanessa. In the family room bathroom, as I changed into dry paper scrubs, my phone rang again. "Daniel." I answered without speaking. "Emma? Where are you? You're making me worried with all these dramatic messages." "My mother just died," I said flatly. Pause. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'll be right there." "Which hospital?" "Don't bother. Finish your meeting with Vanessa." The champagne looked expensive, wouldn't want it to go flat. Another pause, longer this time. "Emma, you're confused. I can explain everything. I need to arrange my mother's funeral now. Apparently our joint account works for lunch dates but not for hospital rides." I hung up, turned off my phone and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, pale, grief-stricken, but with something new in her eyes. The first spark of anger replacing shock. The first glimmer of clarity cutting through 8 years of subtle manipulation. My mother's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "Never let a man make you forget your worth, Emma. I didn't raise you to be anyone's doormat." I touched the paper scrubs, absurdly grateful for their dry embrace. Everything had changed in the span of hours. My mother was gone. My relationship was a facade. But something else was emerging from the wreckage. A determination I hadn't felt in years. The funeral arrangements would come first. Then decisions about the future. But one thing was already decided. The wedding was off. 3 days after my mother's death, I returned to the apartment I shared with Daniel. The initial shock had worn off, leaving a hollow feeling in my chest. Daniel had shown up at the hospital 2 hours after my call, full of explanations about his phone dying and meetings running late. I'd listened in silence, too numb to argue. The apartment was dark and quiet when I entered. Daniel nowhere to be seen. He'd been unusually absent the past days, claiming work emergencies while I handled the initial funeral arrangements alone. I dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, noticing Daniel's spare set was missing. After a hot shower, I sat on our bed with a cup of tea, mindlessly scrolling through photos of Mom on my phone when a notification appeared. Sarah, a college friend who worked at the Grand Hotel downtown, had tagged me in a message. "Thought you were out of town for a funeral? Just saw Daniel checking in. Hope everything's okay." My fingers moved automatically, opening Instagram. I hadn't checked social media since Mom died. A recently posted photo showed Vanessa by a hotel pool, sunglasses perched on her nose, champagne flute in hand. Her caption read, "Business retreats with the boss aren't so bad. #Thankful Thursday #work perks." The timestamp showed it was posted an hour ago. The location tag, the Grand Hotel. Something broke inside me. Not my heart, that had been quietly breaking for years without me noticing. No, this was more like a dam bursting. All the small doubts, the tiny inconsistencies I'd dismissed over our 8-year relationship suddenly rushed forward, demanding attention. I moved to Daniel's desk and opened his laptop. We knew each other's passwords, or at least I thought we did. His computer requested a fingerprint or password I didn't recognize. Changed recently, clearly. I tried variations of our usual shared passwords with no luck. Then I remembered his tendency to write passwords on sticky notes hidden under his keyboard. Sure enough, there it was, mvan28. A combination of my name, her name, and the day they first met, before he'd even met me. The password worked. His browser history had been cleared, but his email was still logged in. I scrolled through his inbox, heart pounding. There it was: hotel confirmations, dinner reservations, jewelry receipts. All carefully timed during business trips or late meetings. But what made my hands shake was the email from our wedding venue. Subject line: confirmation of cancellation and transfer. Date: 6 weeks ago. I opened it and read with growing disbelief. Dear Mr. Reynolds, we confirm the cancellation of wedding venue booking for Reynolds/Parker on September 15th. As requested, the deposit has been transferred to secure the property purchase at Lakeside Villas, Unit 14B. The remaining balance of $35,000 will be due as specified in the separate agreement. Our wedding venue payment had been redirected to purchase a property. I searched for Lakeside Villas in his email and found the purchase agreement. The buyer's name: Vanessa Chambers. My mind raced back to countless conversations where Daniel insisted we couldn't afford to buy property yet. We needed to save for the wedding first. Meanwhile, he'd been buying a lakeside villa for his ex. I reached for my phone to call him, then stopped. What would be the point? More lies? More gaslighting? Instead, I opened our banking app. My access was still blocked, but I had taken photos of recent statements for tax purposes. I retrieved them, studying each transaction with new awareness. Regular transfers to an account labeled investment fund. Except we didn't have an investment fund. Large withdrawals before every business trip. A pattern so obvious I felt stupid for never questioning it. I pulled open Daniel's closet, pushing aside his expensive suits. Behind them, a small safe we rarely used. I tried the combination, my birthday, but it didn't work. On a hunch, I tried Vanessa's birthday, which I remembered from years ago when Daniel had explained why he couldn't see me that weekend, an obligation to attend her party as friends. The safe clicked open. Inside, passport, an extra credit card I didn't know about, and a small jewelry box. Not containing my grandmother's ring he'd proposed with, which had mysteriously needed cleaning for months. Instead, it held a diamond pendant with a note: for my V, what's mine is yours. Always has been. My phone rang, startling me. Daniel's face flashed on the screen. I answered without speaking. Emma? Where are you? I've been calling for hours. His voice sounded concerned, practiced. At the apartment, I replied flatly. I thought you were staying at Jenny's tonight. A slight edge to his voice. I have a late meeting. At the Grand Hotel? I asked quietly. Silence. Then, what are you talking about? I'm at the office. That's strange because Sarah saw you checking in earlier. And Vanessa seems to be enjoying her business retreat there. More silence. Then a sigh. Emma, you're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. I'm in meetings all day working on the Miller account. You know how important this client is. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Like you'll explain the cancelled wedding venue? Or the lakeside villa you bought for Vanessa? Or the jewelry hidden in your safe? His tone changed completely. You went through my things? My emails? What gives you the right? 8 years gives me the right, I interrupted. My investment in your startup gives me the right. The fact that you blocked my access to our joint account while my mother was dying gives me the right. You're overreacting. There are explanations for everything if you just... I hung up. My hands should have been shaking, but they weren't. Instead, I felt an unusual clarity. I walked to our closet and pulled out a suitcase, then stopped. This was his apartment, technically. His name on the lease. I'd moved in with him 4 years ago, giving up my own place because it made financial sense. Another decision that conveniently increased my dependency on him. I reached for my engagement ring to remove it, then remembered I hadn't put it back on after the hospital. It sat in my purse, the diamond that had once seemed so meaningful now looking like what it was, a prop in an elaborate performance. I placed the ring carefully on top of our wedding invitation, which still sat on the entry table. The ivory paper with gold embossing announced a union that would never happen. September 15th, 4 months away. My phone buzzed with text messages from Daniel. Don't do anything rash. I'm coming home now. We can work this out. Think about everything I've done for you. That last one made me laugh. A short, harsh sound in the empty apartment. Yes, I was thinking about everything he'd done. Isolating me from friends who weren't supportive enough of my career. Convincing me to quit my job because he could support us both, while I focused on wedding planning. Gradually taking control of our finances because I wasn't good with money. The apartment door slammed open, making me jump. Daniel stood there, breathing hard, still wearing his suit from work. No hotel bathrobe, no evidence of the meeting he claimed to be in. Emma, stop. Whatever you're thinking, just stop. His voice was calm, reasonable, the voice that had convinced me of so many things over the years. I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. The carefully styled hair. The expensive watch my mother's insurance money had helped buy. The practiced concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. Daniel caught my arm as I tried to pass. Where do you think you're going? We need to talk about this like adults. I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. I'm going to arrange my mother's funeral. You remember her, right? The woman who died while you were wining and dining Vanessa. His expression shifted to the sympathetic look he'd perfected over the years. Emma, I understand you're devastated about your mother. You're not thinking clearly. Let me help you with the funeral arrangements. Like you helped me get to the hospital? I stepped back. No thank you. Be reasonable. You don't have access to enough money right now. His tone was patronizing. I'll unblock the account and we can discuss everything after the funeral. I reached into my purse and pulled out my mother's bank card. Mom named me on her account years ago. I don't need your money. His eyes narrowed. That's hardly enough for a proper funeral. It's not your concern anymore. I moved toward the door again. Don't be dramatic. Where will you even go? To honor my mother properly. I paused at the doorway. And to make sure I never waste another day on someone who wouldn't spare 8 minutes to help save her life. As the door closed behind me, I heard him call out, "You'll be back. You always come back." Maybe before I would have. But not this time. I checked into a small hotel using my mother's card, then called the funeral home. The director, Mr. Calloway, was kind and patient as we discussed options. When I mentioned my budget constraints, he surprised me. Your mother prepaid for most of her arrangements 5 years ago, Miss Parker. She selected everything, the casket, the service details, even the flowers. She just asked that you choose the final resting place. Tears welled in my eyes. Even in death, Mom was taking care of me. I spent the evening making calls to her friends and our remaining family members. With each conversation I felt stronger. These people knew and loved my mother, and by extension me, without conditions or manipulation. Morning brought an unexpected visitor to my hotel room. Aunt Sarah, my mother's closest friend whom I hadn't seen in years. Daniel had thought her too opinionated, and gradually we'd lost touch. Your mother called me last week, she said, hugging me tightly. She was worried about you. Said something felt off about Daniel, but you wouldn't listen. She was right, I admitted. I should have listened. We all have blind spots when it comes to love, honey. He squeezed my hand. What matters is that you're seeing clearly now. Aunt Sarah helped me select a beautiful plot in the cemetery near our childhood home. Together we visited the funeral home to finalize details, where Mr. Calloway handed me an envelope. Your mother left this with her arrangements. She asked that it be given to you privately. Inside was a letter and a bank statement showing an account I didn't know existed, with my name on it. Mom had been secretly saving for years, accumulating a modest but meaningful sum. My dearest Emma, her letter began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But I hope I've left you with more than just money. I hope I've left you with the strength to choose yourself when others won't. Your father taught me that lesson too late. Don't make my mistake. There's enough here to start fresh if you need to. Love always, Mom. The funeral was set for Saturday. By Friday afternoon, flowers and condolence cards had filled my hotel room. But nothing from Daniel, who had apparently given up calling after I blocked his number. At the funeral home viewing, I stood greeting guests when a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. Daniel strode in, Vanessa trailing behind him. He'd brought his ex to my mother's funeral. Emma, he announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I've been so worried. You haven't been answering my calls. Before I could respond, he pulled me into a hug, whispering, You've spent over $10,000 from our emergency fund on this funeral. We need to talk now. I extracted myself from his embrace. There is no "our" anymore, Daniel. Don't make a scene, he hissed, gripping my elbow. What will people think? They'll think I finally came to my senses. I raised my voice slightly. Why is Vanessa at my mother's funeral? Daniel's public mask slipped for just a second, revealing the cold calculation beneath. She's being supportive. More than I can say for how you've been acting. Supportive. I laughed softly. Like when you supported her luxury condo purchase with our wedding venue deposit? His face paled. Several nearby mourners had stopped to listen. You're confused, he insisted, his smile strained. The grief is making you irrational. Actually, I've never been clearer about anything. I took a deep breath. In fact, I'd like to make an announcement. I stepped to the front of the room. Guests quieted, anticipating a traditional eulogy. Thank you all for coming to honor my mother. She was the strongest person I've ever known, and I only wish I'd inherited more of her wisdom sooner. I paused, looking directly at Daniel. She taught me that love doesn't take, it gives. It doesn't control, it supports. A lesson I'm finally learning. There will be no wedding in September. There will be no future with someone who couldn't be bothered to help when my mother needed emergency care. Gasps and whispers rippled through the room. Daniel's face contorted with anger before he quickly composed himself. Emma is understandably emotional right now, he announced, moving toward me. We can discuss private matters later, dear. Aunt Sarah stepped between us. I think Emma's said all that needs saying. To my surprise, Daniel's parents approached. His mother took my hand. We had no idea, Emma, she said quietly. About any of it. She turned to her son. Daniel, is it true you refused to take Emma to the hospital when her mother was dying? Daniel stammered. It wasn't like that. I had meetings. With her? His father interrupted, glancing at Vanessa, who was trying to become invisible near the exit. The confrontation continued in hushed, tense tones, but I was done participating. I returned to my mother's casket, placing my hand on hers one last time. Thank you, I whispered. For everything. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in days, they weren't for Daniel or the relationship I'd lost. They were for the years wasted, for the mother I'd never see again, and for the freedom I finally had to become the woman she always believed I could be. 3 days after the funeral, I moved from the hotel into a small studio apartment Aunt Sarah helped me find. The modest space felt luxurious in its simplicity. No expensive furniture chosen to impress Daniel's business associates. No art pieces selected to match his sophisticated aesthetic. Just clean, open space where I could breathe. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Daniel, cycling through predictable patterns. First came the apologies. I was under so much stress. I wasn't thinking clearly. I made a terrible mistake. Then the gifts started arriving. Flowers, jewelry, even a car key with a note saying, "So you'll never be stranded again." I donated the flowers to a nursing home, returned the jewelry, and had the car towed back to his office with a note. I'd rather walk. When gifts failed, the threats began. I've contacted a lawyer about the money you invested in my business. You'll never work in this industry again. I've told everyone about your mental health issues. That last one made me laugh. I had no history of mental health problems. But it was exactly the kind of lie Daniel would craft to undermine my credibility. I scheduled an appointment with Patricia Chin, a lawyer Aunt Sarah recommended. She listened carefully as I detailed the financial entanglements of my relationship with Daniel. You invested $50,000 in his startup 5 years ago? Patricia clarified, reviewing my documents. Yes. It was inheritance from my grandfather. Daniel said a formal contract wasn't necessary since we were getting married. Patricia's expression remained neutral, but her pen pressed harder into her notepad. And you have proof of this investment? Email exchanges, bank transfer records, and witnesses who heard him acknowledge it repeatedly at dinner parties, when it impressed people. Good. We'll file for your rightful share immediately. She looked up. In my experience, men like Daniel fold quickly when faced with legal action. They prefer targets who won't fight back. As I was leaving Patricia's office, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Is this Emma Parker? A woman's voice, tentative. Yes. Who's calling? It's Vanessa Chambers. Pause. Please don't hang up. I remained silent, waiting. I need to meet with you. There are things you should know, things that affect you. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop across town. I arrived early, selecting a table with a clear view of both entrances. Vanessa appeared exactly on time, looking nothing like the confident woman from her social media posts. Her eyes darted nervously around the cafe. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see." "You're somewhere on the list," I replied coolly. "What's this about?" She placed a manila envelope on the table. "I thought you were the enemy for years, the woman who stole Daniel from me. But I was wrong. We're both wrong about a lot of things." Vanessa nodded. "Daniel never broke up with me when he started seeing you. He told me you were a wealthy client's daughter he had to charm for business reasons." She pushed the envelope toward me. "For 8 years he's been playing us against each other. The property he bought in my name? It's not for me. It's another investment property with his actual girlfriend." I stared at her. "What?" "There's a third woman, Melissa. She works at his company's Tokyo office. I found out last month when I surprised him during his business trip." Her laugh was bitter. "Apparently I'm just the local entertainment. You were the respectable fiancé for his business image. Melissa is his. I don't even know." I opened the envelope. Inside were photos, hotel receipts, property agreements, all with dates overlapping our relationship and his supposed rekindled romance with Vanessa. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because he's dangerous when exposed." Her voice dropped. "When I confronted him, he threatened to ruin me professionally. Said he'd tell everyone I embezzled company funds. He has documents that make it look real." A cold sensation settled in my stomach. "Has he ever been physically threatening?" Vanessa's hesitation answered before her words did. "Not exactly hitting, but..." She pushed up her sleeve, revealing finger-shaped bruises on her wrist. "He gets angry when contradicted." We talked for nearly 2 hours, comparing stories and discovering patterns neither of us had seen alone. As we parted, Vanessa handed me a flash drive. Financial records, doctored company documents, conversations where he discusses managing us. "My lawyer has copies. I thought you should too." Back at my apartment, I barely had time to process this new information when my phone lit up with messages from former coworkers. "Are you okay? Call me." "What's happening with Daniel?" I called Jenny, who answered immediately. "Emma, Daniel showed up at the office today with Marcus and Brett, telling everyone you're having a breakdown over your mother's death and have been making dangerous accusations. He wanted us to stage an intervention." My old department had been gathered in a conference room where Daniel, flanked by his loyal friends, delivered a concerned speech about my fragile state and how I'd fabricated stories about his behavior. "But then Brett asked why you'd make up such specific details," Jenny continued, "and Daniel just changed. His face got all cold and he said something like, 'Because unstable women always target successful men for money.' It was creepy, Emma." Brett backed down immediately. I thanked Jenny for the warning and hung up, hands shaking slightly. Daniel was escalating, trying to isolate me professionally. As I contemplated my next move, a knock at my door startled me. Through the peephole I saw Daniel. Somehow he'd found my new address. "Emma, open up. We need to talk." His voice carried through the door. "I know you're in there." I remained silent, my back pressed against the wall beside the door. "This is ridiculous. I'm trying to help you." The doorknob rattled violently. "You're making me look bad in front of everyone. After everything I've done for you." His voice dropped to a menacing whisper that somehow felt louder than his shouts. "Open this door or I swear to God, Emma, you'll regret it." The door shuddered as he slammed against it. I grabbed my phone to call 911 when a familiar voice echoed from the hallway. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" It was my neighbor Michael, whom I'd briefly met during move-in. "Mind your own business. This is between me and my fiancé," Daniel snarled. "Ex-fiancé," I called through the door, finding my voice. "And he's leaving now." "Like hell I am." Daniel's voice hardened. "Emma, you've embarrassed me enough. Open this door or..." "Or what?" Michael interrupted. "The police are already on their way. My wife called them when we heard you threatening her." A tense silence followed, then footsteps retreating down the hall. I slumped to the floor, adrenaline draining from my body. Another gentle knock. "Emma? He's gone. Are you okay?" I opened the door to find Michael and his wife Claire standing there, concern evident on their faces. We did call the police, Claire assured me. They should be here soon. I invited them in, telling them abbreviated versions of recent events as we waited for the officers. Their kindness, from virtual strangers, contrasted sharply with the cruelty from someone who had claimed to love me for 8 years. When the police arrived, I filed a report and obtained information about restraining orders. As they were leaving, one officer paused. Miss Parker, based on what you've told us and his escalating behavior, I'd strongly recommend staying somewhere else for a few days. Somewhere he wouldn't think to look. That night, as I packed a small bag to take to Aunt Sarah's house, I realized something profound. In trying to destroy me, Daniel had actually set me free. Each retaliatory action revealed more of who he truly was, not just to me but to everyone around him. I left a single item behind in the empty apartment. A framed photo of my mother deliberately positioned to face the door. A silent guardian over the space I was temporarily leaving, and a reminder of why I would never go back. 6 months can change everything. The seasons shift, wounds begin to heal, and life finds new rhythms. I stood in my small office overlooking Main Street, watching autumn leaves dance across the sidewalk below. My marketing consultancy had just landed its third major client, a feat I once would have thought impossible without Daniel's connections. Mom's life insurance and the settlement from my investment in Daniel's company had provided enough capital to start fresh. Patricia Chin had been right. When faced with actual legal documentation and witnesses, Daniel had settled quickly rather than risk exposure in court. I opened my laptop to review the final designs for Eleanor's Haven, the small business I'd started with the remainder of Mom's savings. Named after her, it provided temporary housing and career counseling for women leaving abusive relationships. The first resident would move in next week. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder: dinner with Ryan 7 p.m. Ryan Keating had been my realtor when I purchased my new condo, and somehow our professional relationship had evolved into friendship and recently cautious romance. He understood my need for independence and never pushed for more than I was ready to give. A new email notification appeared in my inbox. The sender made my breath catch. Daniel Reynolds. After months of silence, what could he possibly want? Against my better judgment, I opened it. Emma, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need to tell you that my life has fallen apart since you left. The company is struggling. We lost the Miller account after rumors spread about my personal conduct. Vanessa has filed a lawsuit. Melissa returned to Japan and blocked my calls. My parents barely speak to me. The lakeside property is in foreclosure. I realize now how much I took you for granted. You were the only real thing in my life, and I destroyed that with my selfishness. I'm seeing a therapist now. Too late, I know. But I wanted you to know that you were right about everything. I'm sorry about your mother. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me most. If there's any chance of forgiveness, please contact me. Daniel. I closed the email without replying. There was a time when his apparent suffering would have given me satisfaction, or when his apology might have tempted me back. That time had passed. His problems were his own to solve, just as mine had been. I gathered my things and headed home to prepare for my date with Ryan. As I walked through downtown, I noticed a familiar figure entering the office building across the street. Vanessa. After our coffee shop meeting, she had found a position at a competing marketing firm. We occasionally crossed paths professionally now, sharing a cordial respect born from shared experience. My phone rang as I reached my car. An unknown number. Hello. Emma Parker? A male voice I didn't recognize. Speaking. This is the front desk at Reynolds Consulting. There's a Daniel Reynolds here insisting on seeing you. He claims you have an appointment. I froze. I have no appointment with Mr. Reynolds. That's what I thought. He seems unstable. Should I call security? Yes, please do. I ended the call, hands trembling slightly. After 6 months of silence, Daniel had escalated from email to attempting in-person contact. I called Ryan to cancel our date, explaining the situation. I'm coming over, he said immediately. And I'm bringing dinner with me. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. I want to. His voice was gentle but firm. Unless you'd rather be alone? No, I admitted. Company would be nice. I arrived home, double-checking my security system. Another change since leaving Daniel. Ryan arrived 30 minutes later with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a calming presence that helped settle my nerves. As we ate, I showed him Daniel's email. Classic manipulation, Ryan observed. Notice how his problems are front and center? Even his apology about your mother ties back to him. He's sorry he wasn't there, not sorry for your loss. I nodded. 6 months ago I might not have seen that. Are you going to respond? No. There's nothing to say. After dinner, as Ryan was leaving, he handed me a small package. I found this at that vintage bookstore you like. Thought of you immediately. Inside was a travel journal with an inscription. The journey matters more than the destination. Your mother wanted you to travel, right? You mentioned that once. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, remembering a detail I'd mentioned in passing, contrasted sharply with years of Daniel dismissing my dreams. The next morning my office phone rang. My assistant's voice was tight with tension. Emma, Daniel Reynolds is in the lobby. Security is asking if you want to press trespassing charges. I took a deep breath. Tell them yes. Instead of hiding, I walked to the lobby. Daniel stood there, disheveled but still wearing an expensive suit. When he saw me, his expression shifted from anger to a practiced contrition. Emma, please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Security officers flanked him, waiting for my signal. Why are you here, Daniel? To apologize properly. To show you I've changed. He took a step toward me, stopping when the security guards tensed. I've lost everything. I need you. There it was again, all about him, his needs, his losses. You haven't changed at all, I said quietly. You're still only thinking about yourself. That's not fair. I drove 6 hours to see you. I've been sleeping in my car. And you think that entitles you to my time? My forgiveness. His facade cracked. After 8 years together? Yes, it fucking does. I nodded to the security guards who moved toward him. Wait. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket, producing a small box. I brought this. To show you I'm serious. Inside was his mother's antique emerald ring. A family heirloom he'd once promised me but never delivered. Keep it, I said. It belongs in your family. As security escorted him out, I returned to my office and closed the door, expecting to feel shaken. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. I'd faced him on my terms, in my space, surrounded by the life I'd built without him. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, the travel journal Ryan had given me open on my lap. I began writing. Dear Mom, I'm planning that Mediterranean cruise you always wanted us to take together. I'll be bringing your photo and visiting all the places you dreamed of seeing. You taught me that endings are just beginnings in disguise. You were right. I'm not the same woman who stood frozen in that hospital room 6 months ago. I'm stronger now. Clear. I know what I deserve and I won't settle for less again. The wedding that never happened turned out to be the best gift Daniel ever gave me. Freedom to become the person you always knew I could be. I miss you every day, but I carry your strength with me. Love always. Emma. I closed the journal and looked out at the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new clients, progress on Eleanor's Haven, perhaps another dinner with Ryan. My life was unfolding in ways I never could have imagined while with Daniel. Messier sometimes, but authentically mine. The betrayal that had once felt like an ending had become the beginning I never knew I needed. And for that, strangely enough, I was grateful.